Robert Yuen, welcome to the Archispeak podcast.
Thank you for having me. Monograph turned 6 years old this week, and now I'm kind of upset because it's taken 6 years before I got on the podcast.
Well, you got to earn it. You got to earn it around here.
I'm working really hard every night. So I'm really grateful for finally have earned the first time, and I'm excited to be here.
So, I mean, you're basically a kindergartner, and
I am.
you were finally eligible to get on the show.
In most states, I think I'll be first grade, but like I am,
Okay.
we're still
Well, it
very
depends when you were
early.
born, all those things. Yeah. Well, what I'm excited to talk about is this new report that you've come out with. And when did this come out? About a month ago, I want to say.
This came out a little bit more than a month ago, but approximate. And this
Okay.
is the second time we've done it. Our first time was last year, right around this time, and this is our second go at it.
And then the report is called the Architecture and Engineering Salary and Business Benchmarks Report 2025.
We should work on that name.
You
We
have to
should
get all
work
the
on
keywords. This is like shopping on Amazon. All the keywords have to be in the title of whatever it is we're buying. So you guys nailed it. And like you said, this is the second report that's come out. But new this year is salary information, which I really want to talk about today. And I know Cormac has a question or maybe a topic to kind of kick this part of the discussion off.
Well, so we were thinking about the AIA's survey that they put out for salaries. And I know that we sort of kind of pre-recording, we're talking a little bit about surveys are only as good as the information and the participation. So how is that different from how you accumulated the data for your report?
It's a really good question. Like I have not reviewed AIA's survey yet, but I want to be very clear. Like this is our benchmark report. It's not a survey. We have over 1,700 firms here at Monograph. We anonymize all that data set, and we spend an enormous amount of time trying to find trends and information to surface that we believe is as accurate as possible to give the entire industry a better picture of what the market looks like, including on the salary side. So it is not a survey. We anonymize our own data set. So it's a very different approach in terms of like, let's say, disclosing and sharing information in service of essentially being transparent with the industry. Very different approach.
Yeah, so I mean, you're pulling your data, I mean, directly from the users of Monograph, is it?
Yes.
And so you're getting pretty much a full accurate picture of everything.
Based
It-
on our customers, based on our
Yes.
customers, and we have 1,700 paying customers. So like my goal is as we grow as a business and our customer count grows, our data and our view in the industry gets more and more accurate. Like the more data we have, the better and honed in on accuracy we get.
And the reason I was bringing up the AIA, because it seems, as we were talking about, it's a survey and it's only as good as the participation. And we know that AIA gets a kind of a very random participation. You go to any AIA meeting or AIA National or something, and you don't get the level of participation of the actual membership itself, or even are all of the architects members and stuff. And the survey that I'm referring to, and I don't have the name in front of me to tell you exactly what it's called, but basically it's their yearly report on salaries. And so if you went to that particular site, you would be able to put in like a plug in where you live, your years of practice, what your are you a PM or PA, those kind of things. And it kind of gives you an approximation of what salary you should be earning for where you're at. And it usually doesn't accurately portray, in my opinion,
Your
as-
experience, right? Like
in my
you've actually
experience.
used it to look it up. Right?
I have, and have had used it as points of conversation for other people when they're looking for, am I making appropriate compensation and things like that? And typically it's no, based off of at least just what we're seeing, because it kind of skews or trends higher than what we're actually making, which then it just creates a level of depression.
I'm not sure that Robert's report does much better in
Oh,
that regard. I mean, because there's talking about salary by role. You have three top insights that you throw out on this in this PDF, and so I'm going to read what those are, and then I think this is just kind of talking points that we can work off of here because number one of the top insights is salaries rise only, and this is the wording here is, I want to make sure I say it correctly. Salaries rise only 68%, which is $47,000 from the role of, I'm adding that part in, from designer to principal, suggesting that career earnings plateau unless tied to profitability. Okay, so that's insight number one. Number two is project managers and engineers earn 13% more than architects. And I'm going to put that in quotes because these are actual roles or titles inside of companies. And we all know that companies use a lot of different words to describe those roles, but you're kind of lumping into pretty clear categories. So project managers and engineers, remember this report is for architects and engineers, okay, earn 13% more than architects, suggesting that designers make $12,000 more when they take the path of PM versus architect, which I think is super interesting, okay?
Yeah.
And then point number three for this particular slide of salary by role is project managers earn $26,300 more than non-billable roles, suggesting that firms prioritize project oversight over firm operations. Super interesting little tag right there, right? Because the thing that Robert came on Troxel podcast to really talk about is operations and business from a like that is a design problem, and that is a problem worth working on because the goal is to make as much profit as possible. So if we're prioritizing, I mean, there's always a huge emphasis on making projects profitable, and that means making the company profitable, right? Not necessarily, right? So that to me, I think, is a really interesting distinction that you guys have made in the report as far as these top three insights go. And there is a breakdown. We can put a slide, like a graphic up in the YouTube version of this podcast. And of course, we'll have a link in the show notes so people can download this report and then check it out if they're interested. But, you know, to your point, Cormac, about depression, I mean, if you look at these numbers, like architects should be getting paid more. And like, we can't just say architects should be getting paid more and then what? Expect to be paid more, right? There's a whole lot of things tied to that, but I don't think that these numbers really tell the true value of what architects offer at the same time. So, and I think we can get even more into that for sure. But I'm curious, Robert, from you releasing this report a little over a month ago, can you give us some insight into kind of the feedback that you've been getting? You know, let's just start with this topic as far as salaries. What has come back to you?
So some of the feedback like I hear immediately was like, wow, this is incredible. And it's not a survey. So we can debate, and we should have debates over what this data actually tells us. But the data is what we are essentially anonymizing and gathering from our own customer base, which is a very different way of, let's say, starting the conversations around compensation and salaries. Then the next thing that I usually hear a lot is like, oh my God, the architect should get paid more, but it's not. Why? And what do we have to do to change that? I was like, well, there are a lot of things in Monograph, a company that I have founded and we're working incredibly hard that we can do. But there's also a lot of things we cannot do. And this is a much larger conversation than just one company themselves. And we should have that discussion in terms of like what that might be. But it would have to take the entire industry of getting on board and trying to work together on it. Not just me and not just the three of us, but we could be participants in that conversation and help move the needle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Cormac, what do you think when you hear that? I mean, does that jive with what your experience is, that PMs and engineers earn more than architects? And I'm assuming that by architects, this probably means like a technical role in a firm versus a management role in a firm.
Could be, and I want to be clear that this is our second time doing it. I think as we do it more often, we can get more accuracy. But right now, we're looking at the trends of what our customers have called and labeled as roles as architect. and comparing it with other firms that also have roles titled as PMs or engineers, we can start to essentially say, let's group them all together and let's see what the running averages are across all those firms. And let's present that data back to the world. I can't say with confidence that they are like a licensed architect or a technical architect. We actually don't have that data set. So I can't get as accurate as I would like to. But that's also really, really inspiring for me because I know that there's still a lot more room for improvement every year that we produce this report.
Well, so Evan, to kind of your point, and I think Robert, you just said it best. Is what does that really mean in this role distinction? Because if you look at the traditional role of a project manager, it is more on the kind of, let's just call it money making side, right? You know, it's operating a project at an optimal rate so that you can maximize profits and things like that to make not only your project but your company profitable. And that's different from an architect who is just more kind of like hyper focused on the performance of the project or the success of the deliverables and things like that. And so they're not really focused on the financial side of things, whereas project managers have to be and need to be. And so if you're looking at that and you're running efficiently as a PM, then yeah, it does make sense to be compensated more because you are looking out for that bottom line. I hate to say it, there's been many a time in my career where I haven't paid attention to like the bottom lines of things. You give me a project, I'll work on the project, my blinders go on, and I'm just hammering away at getting the project done and getting it done properly, but not with the focus of profitability, but like efficiency of the project, efficiency of the deliverables, and making sure that is really the focus. And my microphone just dropped off my desk. So yeah,
Okay.
apparently I'm not being very efficient here.
You got to talk to your structural engineer about that.
I know, right? And that's why, and honestly, that's why engineers get paid more, is because they can at least make the microphone stand up. But, I mean, does that make sense from even your experience, Evan? I mean, how much when you were at a firm in your role, not the final role as a project designer, were you entrenched in project profitability?
It depends. Like, there's definitely when I worked in the digital practice role, I got to hear a lot about the profitability side of things, right? But not when I was working necessarily on the project. There was definitely a
and that's what I mean.
distinction between roles. Yeah. So as a designer, and I think what's kind of eye-opening about this, I'm looking at your numbers here, Robert, based on roles. So designer is the lowest of all of these, right? So designer is at 78K. And maybe, Robert, you can just kind of give us an idea of where these numbers came from, as like their averages, I assume, for that role. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so 78K for designer versus 87 for architect, 98 for engineer, 99 for project manager are the numbers that this report shows. And I look at that and I think, I think that pretty much correlates to my experience. Project managers are doing the things that Cormac talked about. They're managing multiple projects typically.
Right.
They're out client facing. They're fielding RFIs. They're talking to the contractor. They're at the OAC meetings. The architect is in the office, right? And they're technical, working on the projects plural. Designer, same thing. It's like there's some back and forth with the clients, but then it's really like design oriented roles on the project. And I think to Cormac's point too, it sounds terrible, right? Like, well, we're not aware of profitability and I think that's just how the profession has been. And it's really like, how many hours do I get to do a thing? That's right. What it really translates to in terms of the project team. How many hours do I get to do a thing, and can I do it in that amount of time?
I think there's a huge correlation between those who are responsible for the livelihood of a business and them being compensated appropriately. And I think it's historically been looked upon as like a taboo or not so good topic. But do want to make sure that my opinion on this subject is, well, like, if we're not successful on this project, it has a direct correlation to jobs.
Yeah.
It's really that important. Like, that we cannot sit here and say all we want is profit and that's bad. It was like, well, if we don't have a profit, we also don't have a job. It's actually extraordinarily important. Those who are responsible for maintaining that bottom line and making sure that the project still executes on time has a huge responsibility. And yes, we do transfer and translate budgets to hours and time and commitments, but like those are, I would look at it as a young designer as a really good constraint. We have a constraint. We can't design forever. We will love to design the best project we can, and we want to do good by the world and be amazing architects and designers. But there are also natural constraints that we always have to work within. And some of those constraints are natural, like gravity, and things gotta stand and work, and universal. And some of those constraints are around human experiences. And then we also have constraints around timeline and money. We should respect those constraints and understand those constraints. And when we do, I think those firms and those individuals and those projects become extraordinarily successful.
Now, I'd like to throw in a disclaimer from the things that I was saying a little bit earlier on back in the day, and we all have gray, so we understand what back in the day means.
We're not going to share age today. I don't feel comfortable doing that.
But, you know, a lot of the project roles were far more siloed. You've got your role, you've got your role, you've got your role. Now, fast forward to today where, you know, data and project performance data is actually more readily available in real time. And even today we had a community meeting for the studio that I'm in, and we walked through with everybody from the senior principal down to the most junior staff member. And we talked about project profitability. Yeah, there you go. I got it. And we talked about, like, you know, what makes good performers, what goes into that, what kind of ingredients that every team member can, you know, actually do to help a project stay in the green. You know, and those were things that we really didn't talk about when I was a junior architect. I mean, you know, if I wanted to ask about how's a project doing, or, you know, where's the money go, or things like that, we were just like, how are those details doing? You know, it wasn't as freely exchanged. And now the thing about it is, and again, with, like, you know, Monograph and things like this, that it just, the information is freely shareable to everybody so that they can understand how they and their role in a project can contribute to the project profitability. And so it starts to, in a way, level the playing field a little bit from that project manager to that most junior project architect, where now everybody has a responsibility in that project profitability.
I truly believe that we're in an era where radical transparency across the industry is starting to take hold. Financial literacy is starting to get increased across the board. And that's only going to produce, my bet is, it's only going to produce better designers and better architects. It will take time, but we can already see a lot of those signs because the data is accessible. AI is doing their part. Monograph is doing our part. Schools and education and firms are doing their part. So I can see this change already coming. So I imagine roles will probably change over time. Responsibilities and accountability will change. And pay bands will probably change too as firms become more efficient and more aware in terms of how well they're doing on a per employee basis, per project base, per team base, and on a firm as a whole.
I think what's interesting about your comment, Cormac, is that I would agree that those weren't topics of conversation, and they are starting to, or are topics of conversation now, because there is a much more of an awareness. The internet kind of did this, right? It just opened up everybody's eyes to the potential of you directly see what your how they're operating. You directly see the job postings. There's been a lot of work to put salary ranges onto job requirements, job posting
Right.
boards, right? And I think that all of that has kind of brought more transparency to this whole process. But that whole like, this is how your role directly impacts this business is not a thing that it was always like, here's what you do on this project.
Right. Exactly.
And I think
Yeah.
that the conversation is shifting to, and if it hasn't, it needs to in firms that are listening. It's like how does what I do help make this thing work? How, like, we've all come together to accomplish these goals. Like, yes, I have a role on a project. Yes, I have a role on a team or in the corporation or whatever. But how does it directly contribute to the reason this business exists, which is to do business, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's that to me is a fundamental, and a lot of people in architecture think that sounds dirty, right? Like, because no, we're here to we do design. We're here to elevate the built environment. We're here to make better places. But like, you can do that and not be in business, but you're a business.
Yeah.
And that was a decision that was made, and it continues to be one of the guiding principles of all of these companies that are out there. And so tying my responsibility back into that is super, super important.
I think somewhere along the way, we focus so much on our contribution to the built world that we forgot that I can't contribute if there was no business.
Mm-hmm. True.
Like,
Yeah.
but it's like, of course, I
Yeah.
think naturally, no one is a bad person, and we all want to create incredible spaces for the built environment. We all want to create incredible architecture for us to experience, live, worship, go, work, and cherish every single day. But the reality also is, I can't do that if we also can't put food on the table, and we can't
Right.
ensure the livelihood of the business that is supporting that mission. I explain this almost all the time here at Monograph internally. Is like, hey, like, we have a mission, but that we also need to make sure that the mission stays alive. So that there's two responsibilities there. We have to stay really, really focused on what we're here to do, and we also have to ensure that we can continue to do it. It's really, really important.
Yeah, I laughed when both of you were talking about that, because I'm the poster child of the opposite. I was a sole practitioner, well, actually practitioner of two, and we were so hyper-focused on the quality of work that now I work for somebody else because I was basically didn't stay focused, or neither one of us stayed focused on the business and the business health. And I mean, we can say, sure, 2008, when we went out of business, kind of helped that factor a little bit. However, I know of many a firm who stayed afloat and floated through the economic downturns because they focused on their business as the business health as much. And so yeah, and I don't know if this question is something that can be answerable or not, but and I don't know if you can share or divulge any of this. We're an ESOP. And so everybody in our firm, we feel like we have a skin in the game. We feel like, we need to know the health of the business because we're part owners. And so everybody from the most junior to the most senior, we own this business. And so we need to understand the health of the business. And if the business is hurting, then how do we as an individual help our firm? And I don't know if, and this is where I'm kind of just speculating, do people who work for, say, larger firms really have their pulse, their finger on the pulse of the health, the business health of these larger firms that are S corps or things like that? Do they just care about where's my next paycheck coming from and not really care about the health of the business? And so I'm just kind of curious if there's anything in kind of like the research from your users that, kind of help indicate one way or the other, or if it's unquantifiable.
I don't have that information. Like, we don't collect incorporation types from our customers.
Yeah.
We don't collect if they are employee owned or single owned, or if there's a stakeholder of their stocks and shares. What I do believe, though, is leadership has a responsibility of articulating everyone's contribution to the business, regardless of the structural entity of the organization. Because at the end of the day, your skin in the game is your salary, right? Like you want to. I'm going to make a few assumptions. You like where you work, you enjoy the work that you do, and you enjoy going to work with the people that you work with on the projects that you have. Well, if all those are true, I think there's a ton of incentive already to ensure that like you can continue to do what you do, and the responsibilities fall on leadership to communicate how well is the business going, the health of the business, and what are we doing to ensure future health of the business. I think that's probably, look, I was an architect for 10 years. I've now been running Monograph for 6. I can say with my experience, we don't have that conversation enough from
Right.
firm owners across the board. It's, hey, we should not only talk about design as a craft and as a quality of work, but we should constantly be also talking about the financial literacy of the business. I'm not saying that you have to have a 50-50 split between both conversations, but you can't be a percent one way and zero. Like we gotta have
Yeah.
some version of a harmony between the conversation of craft and the conversation of finances, money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. You have other metrics in this report where you talk about, I mean, these are all kind of around the topic of financial literacy, right? You have utilization rates, you have realization rates. I think we know what utilization rates are, but I'm not going to assume that for everybody who's listening. And the realization rates, I think these are both things that you could define, because both of these are talking about performance, right?
Correct.
Within a firm, and then how that kind of ties back to this idea of financial literacy, why it's important to understand what these rates are.
I think it is just as important as an architect learning what line weights are and what a section is and what poche is and shades and like building materials, facades, exteriors, floor plates. It's just as important.
I hear you, Robert, buttering up the audience right now with terms that they of endearment when it
Archispeak.
comes to architecture, and now you're gonna hit us with a ton of bricks.
Yeah. But
No, so I also believe in lifelong learning. So like I do think there are certain skills and certain information that you learn naturally in school and academia. And then you continue to learn as a young designer and continue to learn as a young architect, licensed architect, and then eventually a manager and an owner. I think some of these financial terms like utilization rate, realization rates, you can look at them as a performance metric. You can also look at them as an efficiency metric. But they're very important because they give you a picture of, are you actually doing okay? And we can argue all day in terms of like what is a good utilization rate and what is a good realization rate. But I would say it's way more important to at least understand how the math is done and where you are specifically within your firm. Because like that might be like a really good utilization rate for one firm might not be a good rate for another. And that's okay. Because they're two different types of firms, probably in two different types of markets, probably doing two different types of building typology and client typologies. So your rates are going to look a little bit different. It's way more important that you learn that these rates are important relative to your business, and they give you a line of sight in terms of if you're doing well or not financially. Generally speaking, if you have a very low utilization rate, that is not good. You're not spending your time appropriately on the work, and you're actually spending too much time on non-billable work.
right.
A very low realization rate is actually worse, because realization rate is essentially measuring how well you get paid for your time. So if that is really low, the general assumption is like, oh my God, I'm spending a lot of energy working and I'm not getting compensated for it. Obviously, you'll never hit 100%. That's impossible. And if your realization rate is 0, well, you just got paid 0. You got to find the right rate for your business. And it's way more important that you learn the definition of the rate itself and then determine what's the right rate for your business.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of think about these numbers, and across your metrics, I think you showed something like an 80% ish average, maybe a little higher than that for utilization,
Yes.
and then realization. Where did that come in?
Um, Realization rate relative to, let's say, other industry benchmarks, our customers are also high at 95. I'm looking at it right now, 95.3%, which I'm really, really proud of, because this is where I believe software can help, right? Some of the biggest reasons why a lot of firms don't have high realization rates is they don't stay on top of their invoicing.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't invoice, your realization rate drop. Like they have to do the first step, which is actually
Right.
the invoice, and then you have to do the second step, which is to collect on that invoice. This is where software automations, reminders, streamlining that process. This is where software can absolutely help a firm and remove the burden of doing it manual, remove the burden of actually remembering to do it, and take some of the hesitation of doing it, because I know most architects actually don't like to write invoices and go collect on their work. Here are massive opportunities for software to actually help a ton. But I'm really proud of our customers. I think generally speaking, our customers have amazing utilization rates and realization rates. And I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of automations and workflows that we've introduced to help streamline those firms to be much more higher performing.
I remembered something that you said in a conversation that we had at some point, and I'm curious if you still think this is true. And that was that you thought architects or firms should be billing like every 30 days.
Yeah.
And that would really
it.
benefit the company. This term cash flow is king. I think that was kind of like the idea behind that. It's like
Yeah.
operating cash and it just being more liquid, right, and not waiting as long. Do you still feel like that's appropriate? I mean, you've been in the business longer now since you said that. I don't know. That was probably a year or two ago that you told me that. Is that still the case?
Still the case. It's one of the biggest reasons why I started Monograph is, and I should, preface, this is a generalized statement. Obviously, not all firms and not all billing types can adhere to a monthly billing cycle. But generally speaking, rent comes every month. You have to pay your staff every month. You have to pay your utility bills every month. Like, you have monthly expenditures, which is what, like, we're going to learn terminologies here. Like, the money you have to pay out is called an expenditure, and that normally happens on a monthly cadence. When your money coming in doesn't align, you're going to eventually have a cash flow problem. So historically, here's the thing that I truly believed in when we started Monograph is there were a lot of project-based, multi-month, sometimes multi-years before you essentially can collect on that money. Well, this poses a huge problem since 90% of the industry are small firms. And I have to believe when you're a small firm, you don't have a lot of cash. So what do you do in months where you're not collecting cash, but you have to continue to make payroll, make rent, and pay for things? We have to solve that problem. And we can solve that problem by saying, stop invoicing and billing on a multi-month, multi-year cadence and bring it down to as close as possible to the cadence that we have to spend our money also. This way we can actually manage the cash much more appropriately. I know how much I'm going to spend. I should work really hard to make sure I make that money back. And if I can get the number to match, well, that's a break-even month. If I can get that money to be a little bit more, that's a good thing. Like the bank account grew. And that's what we want. But if that doesn't occur, we have to find other financial mechanisms to ensure that the business stays alive before that check comes in. And that absolutely complicates a small business. My general advice is get that as tight as possible. Ideally, it's monthly, but I also know that the industry is hard, contingent and dependent on typology of work.
Yeah, because I was going to say my experience is in larger firms, it's a lot different. It's billing based off of milestones. So your milestone of
Right.
say 50% CDs, it may have been 6 months before since your last invoice to that next one. And
But there's
it
so many projects happening, right? That they're all staggered, and that's kind of
well,
which
you know,
offsets the cash, which is what a big firm can do.
right,
Right.
exactly.
The smaller you are, the more
The
painful this
more
problem
difficult.
becomes.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I'll remind everyone, 90% of the industries are small firms.
exactly.
So like
Yeah,
if you're in that categorization, this is a very important topic because like you're not a big firm. You don't have a ton of cash at the bank. You don't have big projects that when they do pay, it's a massive windfall of cash. So we have to manage that cash flow much more tactically.
yeah,
And it's a really important topic to talk about because more small firms will survive longer if we can essentially really zero in on like, well, how much money do you spend a month? How much money do you collect? And if those things don't start to align, we got to work on that.
Mhm.
right. The I there's a thought running through my head with big firms that use like small firms as consultants, and typically those contracts are based on paid when paid,
Yes.
and it I can see where you're coming from here, because again, I was in that situation decades ago where we were consulting and we weren't billing at the monthly rate, and bills would come and go, and we'd say, hold on, we'll pay you, kind of thing, to the point where it basically bit us in the ass and we went out of business. And I can't see. I I don't know where I'm going with this other than the fact that it's just one of these. There's this weird catch-22 in the business where when small firms need like work with larger firms for like either a steady income or a good working relationship, but they're not getting paid, it just kind of runs into those problems that you're talking about.
I I wish I have all the answers.
Oh,
Uh,
and
I need a
yeah,
few more gray hairs before I can actually and believe I have all the answers. I don't. But I do believe that the fact that we're talking about it means we're bringing awareness to the problem and firm owners can address it. I don't have all the answers, but I think if you can see it coming, you can address it. A common scenario would be you're a small firm, you have to make sure that not 100% of your work is coming as a vendor or as a consultant to larger firms because you know that you don't have a lot of sway in convincing them to pay you more regularly. It's going to be you get
right,
paid, unpaid scenario.
yeah,
But now that you know that, you should look at your business holistically and like, okay, I need work that's not
hmm,
that can essentially help me cover my monthly cash flow problems, which means I'm going to have to look for work that doesn't look like that. And I need to build a portfolio of work that helps me balance out my finances.
right,
Um, Now that's going to vary from firm to firm, but like at least you're aware that this is something to be addressed and you should then address it relative to your practice. Um, I think the hardest problem is not knowing. And then by the time it does happen, my God, it's too late, right? Like that would be the worst, and that would be the worst outcome.
Mhm.
yeah. If I can go back a little bit on the kind of like the previous talk about salaries and stuff.
Mm.
The thing that I find very encouraging about your report and other reports out there is that taboo that you were talking about of just the fact that we never talked about salaries. We never talked about like what we earn and things like that. And there was even times where myself, I would be like, how much do you want to get paid? I don't know. How much are you willing to pay me? Kind of thing. And, I never positioned myself to know what my value was. And I would go into a new firm or something like that. And they're like, wait, they're only paying you this much? Why? I mean, look at your experience and stuff. And it's because I didn't know what the value was, or I didn't know what I should be paid for that. And it's because we just don't have the conversation about what other people are getting paid or what you should be getting paid for that region, your experience, your position, the things like that. And I've been able to have conversations with students or staff that are looking for jobs and stuff that giving them an opportunity to go and look at the data of what salaries are out there so that they can value themselves properly when they go into these conversations with a prospective hire or a prospective firm, that they understand where they're what the worth is.
I would love for the industry to mature to the point where an individual can say, I know what I'm worth, and I just want to be at market value.
Yeah.
I don't want to be taken advantage of, and I want to be informed as an adult and a professional. And I'm not looking to also take advantage of the employer. I want to be right at market. So let's figure out what is market, and then let's do a good job as a firm and as an industry to raise the market. But I think there are two different conversations there. I want to make sure everyone gets compensated appropriately at market rate, and then we all want to collectively work together to continue to raise the market.
I think what's interesting about your report is you talk about how different tiers by performance firms make per employee, how much faster a high-performing firm gets paid versus a low-performing firm.
Yeah.
And you talk about these utilization rates, and you talk about the realization rates. And I think, to me, okay, so maybe selfishly, but I feel like these kinds of metrics are all great questions to ask during an interview of the firm that you're interviewing with, right? And you're actually doing some due diligence when you're asking those kinds of questions. I bet these kinds of questions, especially at the lower levels, they never get asked, but at the higher levels, maybe they do. And so but also understanding where you fit into that, and understanding what your billable rate is versus what your salary is, and your utilization rate, and then understanding how the company operates from a financial point of view, all plays into this. You call it an algorithm if you want, but you could come up with a formula to basically say here's how it would work with this firm, here's how it would work with this firm, and now I get to pick what works better for me personally in that. And then also looking at that list of okay, here are the roles, here's on average how much they get paid. You get to ask that question, what are the salary ranges for these roles? And that helps you decide where you want to go in your career. I think all of this kind of information really is building toward that goal that you're talking about of radical transparency. Because if I really step back and talk about what I love to talk about, which is working on the profession, it's so hard to do this in a firm or in the profession when you're working on project deadlines. But if you can step back and look at the whole thing, Cormac and I have been doing this podcast for 13 years. We seriously love this profession. We definitely have our problems with it. But at the same time, I want it to be successful. I want it to flourish. I want it to be prosperous. That means everybody in it gets to do that too, gets to be prosperous. And that is what we should all be working toward for each other.
Yes.
Right? Because if my team is prosperous, I'll be prosperous. Right? If my firm is prosperous, I should be prosperous. And that's how it should work in this industry, because it is a super, super team sport, right? Everybody's, we know, I think I mentioned this to Cormac, it's the whole technology thing is work smarter, not harder. And I'm how does that land in a profession where all they know how to do is work harder, right? Work harder, work harder, work harder, right? And I want us to get to a point where we can work smarter, not harder, and flourish, be paid appropriately. Like you said, Robert, be paid at market rate for the contribution that I'm making and the skills that I bring to the table. That to me sounds incredible. And I feel man, there is so much hiding still in this industry. And there's so many taboos that we can't talk about, the royal we, won't address. And there's no organization to this industry really helping move all of that conversation forward. There's a lot of people talking about it here and there, and you're doing this report, you're doing a service to the industry. But man, it's still I think there's a long hill ahead for this kind of thing. But these conversations do matter, having this kind of conversations out loud.
Well, that's why I'm really excited to having this conversation with both of you. And I do believe it's not going to be easy. We've been in this industry for a long time, so it will be very difficult. I also believe that anything that's worth doing is always hard. And that's why I get up and do what I do. And I'm sure that's why you guys get up and do what you do. And is it going to get substantially easier tomorrow morning when we wake up? Probably not. But I know that we're having an impact because, like, I have to believe that. And if we continue to do this every single day, it will have compounding effects across the industry. I wish I had an answer that there was, let's say, a larger organization that can rally the entire industry and push us forward. I don't think that's going to happen. And I can only control where my time goes. And this is the best way I can say I'm doing my best in ensuring that the industry is prosperous. And I'm really, really excited because the data also shows when a firm is prosperous, the employees get paid more too. Like it works. When a firm does well, everyone in that firm also does well because that's usually the right thing to do, and that's actually what happens. Sometimes in salaries, sometimes in bonuses, but if it's working well, it gets people in that company are treated well too.
Because they can see that why are we doing well? And usually because of the contributions of the people who are helping them do well.
Yeah.
And we want to continue to do well. So we want to keep those people. And we know when salaries get stagnant or bonuses or things like that get stagnant, people start to look at other places. It's just like, why am I stuck here? Why, if I'm not going anywhere, if we're not going anywhere, why am I here?
It's a legitimate opportunity cost that you're talking about right there, for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. I think companies have to work really hard to prove to people why they should stay there. And I mean, granted, like when people loop out and go somewhere else, like everybody loses a little bit, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The people who have to do it, but also the firm who's losing those people, right? And it's expensive
Right.
to lose people and hire new people. So
It's very expensive. And I'm a sports guy. I went to Michigan, so I love the phrase, the team, the team, the team. Like that applies. When the team is working well, everyone wins. But it does need a really strong leader. I think firm ownership, starting a firm, we should take that with a much more higher degree of thought. And I'm starting to get into an age group where a lot of my colleagues want to start firms for the desire of doing work and controlling their own time. And I think you're incentivized inappropriately. I think when you start a firm, you have a huge responsibility for the people that you bring on and that you lead. And you should do it for the right reasons. They might not always be the reasons for you to get your time back. I've never met a firm owner, any industry, including architecture, that actually works less. I think it's actually the inverse. Like you work substantially more. I work more now being, the co-founder and CEO of Monograph than I ever have as an architect, which is insane. But I love what I do and it doesn't feel like work.
Well, you'll find this funny, Robert. So I'm teaching now at Lawrence Tech. And you'll know it, seeing how it's just right down the road from your alma mater.
I
And-
studied under Carl Dottman, actually. He was
Okay,
my
awesome.
professor at Michigan before he became dean at LTU.
Yeah. So I was talking to some students last night, and we were talking about time commitments and things like that. And they were just like, well, if you own the firm, obviously you don't have to work as hard. I'm like,
No.
I don't know where you're getting that information from, because it is actually just the opposite, because there's more onus on you for success to be able to employ other people than it is to just sit, say, oh, I've done my job, and sit back and just cross your arms and say, my job's done here, and can move on. So it just happened to be like, as people were listening to a pro practice seminar, and I was like, no, you need to listen a lot more, because what they're telling you there is that, yes, if you're running the business efficiently, that there may be some time to breathe, but it doesn't mean it's time to relax. You still have to keep at it. You still have to keep chasing. And so it's funny that you say that. And I literally just had that comment made to me last night. It's just like, no, kid, sorry.
Life does not work that way. I think generally speaking, you work substantially more.
Yeah.
You should treat the job very thoughtfully in high regard. Like you are about to employ people and you're now responsible for them. I think that we don't have that conversation enough. Like that's the role. And if you're not ready for it and if you don't understand it, I would highly discourage you from doing it because it is a very hard job. You're accountable for the efficiency metrics that you need to hold, for the salaries and the people that follow you, and you're responsible for making sure that they have the incredible work culture environment that you need to build. You're accountable. You're the firm owner.
Yeah.
You do not
Yeah.
get to sleep.
Right.
Like that's not a luxury you get.
Yeah, there's a book I'm sure you know the title, Leaders Eat Last, right? It's like I think that was Simon Sinek, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
But it's like this burden of leadership. A lot of people look at leadership like, oh, I've made it. It's not like that. True leadership
Yes.
is a burden, and I don't mean like there aren't good things that come out of it, like, but it's the business, it's the hard work.
The fulfillment you get is incredible. It's incredible. Like if you do it right, you get to see the fruit of your labor. You get to feel this enormous feeling that like you're doing it the right way and people respect you and they enjoy the environment that you've created and they feel a sense of purpose and mission working within that organization. So I do think there's incredible value if you do start something and you're incredibly successful. But that does not mean that you also don't have to do the work. The work is actually quite intense because the responsibility is quite massive.
Yeah. Well,
And the funny thing is that when you're going to architecture school, none of that work on successful business is really why a lot of people go to school. In fact, again, kind of having this conversation with some of the students last night, I mean, they have this kind of, this isn't what I want to do in architecture. It's just like, well, if you want to do architecture, then there are some things that you do have to do because architecture isn't just that 10% of drawing beautiful buildings and stuff, but successful architects practice the business of architecture. And what all of that means is running the successful business.
And we should break that down. Like usually that means securing projects, ensuring your clientele is happy with the work that you're delivering.
Yeah.
You're running an operationally efficient business, which means you're invoicing, you're managing time, you're collecting payments. You're building a culture, which means you have the right cultural behaviors and events that you feel you deem is appropriate that you want to build. Look, I just made a long list of a lot of things that doesn't even start with the word architect.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
you might not get to design. And this is why I tell a lot of friends, like, hey, like if you want to own a firm, your first responsibility is owning and running the firm. Your responsibility is actually to hire amazing designers and let them design and allow them to design within the constraints that they have to design it. Your job is not to design. Your job is to lead. Let's make sure your job description is very appropriately and accurately described. If you want to start a firm just to design, this is, like I said, I think you're very misinformed, and you won't be happy. That's the
Yes, yes, I was.
Like I want my friends to be happy. Like, hey, do you really want to build a business, or do you really want to design? And you can't really have both.
if you want to
At least
design,
not in the
go work
beginning.
somewhere where you can do that. Yeah.
Right? If you want to design, go design.
Yeah.
If you want to start a firm, go start a firm and just be very laser focused in what you want to do and just be very practical that I don't know if you can do both, at least not in the very beginning. You might earn the right to do both, but that doesn't mean you have to establish a business that will allow you to have that right. That does not happen on day one and probably doesn't happen on the first couple of years. Like it takes time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think being respectful of your time, Robert, thank you for hanging out with us tonight. And I want to maybe make a call to action here at the end, which is, of course, download this report, but in the service of becoming more financially literate. I think that is the real call to action here. You will be more valuable to your firm, no matter what position you're in, if you're more financially literate when it comes to these terms, when it comes to understanding the business of architecture, when it comes to understanding the landscape of other firms in the industry and the data that they're presenting in this. And I think it's one thing I appreciate that you said, Robert, is like this report is just going to keep getting better because you're going to have more data to pull from. It's going to get more accurate over time. It's going to get more nuanced over time, I can only assume, as you add more features into the software and you get more granular with what you can collect and how you can then present that back and extract these really cool insights that are educating the industry on what's actually going on. I think this is super valuable. Appreciate you for putting that together, for leading the team that put this together, but also for just kind of having this vision and putting it out into the world. That's really admirable. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for the acknowledgement, and you just reminded me I have a lot of work to do.
Get to work. Us too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks. And we'll have links to Monograph and the report. And Robert, you can connect with him on LinkedIn if you want to hear more Robert. I'm sure you're appearing on other podcasts too, right, Robert? So
I have an incredible team. I think a lot of the industry, and you have met Chris. Chris, I gotta give him a shout out. Like he's incredible. And just like every other business, like I can't do what I do without incredible people behind me doing the hard work. So Chris, if you're listening, thank you.
So now it's time for you to just kick back because, you've got the team to do the work for you, right?
No, okay. I gotta lead the team. I gotta grow the team.
Right.
The work doesn't stop. If anything, if anyone needs to know, as a business grows, the weight, the weight is bigger and like the responsibility is larger. Like you go from the responsibility of a few people to a few tens of people to 20 of people to hundreds of people. You cannot take the job lightly. I take it very, very seriously.
Well, thanks for hanging out with us tonight.
Yeah,
it's been a
very
really
much.
great conversation, super enlightening, and I think that there's more when people want to dig in. And you can leave comments on our episode over on YouTube, and you can find all the episodes at archispeakpodcast.com. Thanks, everybody.